Hello, and welcome to Tangled Twists. I'm Lissa, and today I'm going to be taking you through the steps to make your very own 18th century skirt. I love a good 18th century skirt. Sometimes they're known as petticoats because it's a skirt that goes underneath a gown, and they are so incredibly easy to make. I have a ton of them because of this. This is one of the first garments that I started making when I wanted to start making my own clothes. And I think if I had made one of these sooner, I probably would have started making more of my own clothes a lot sooner because they are fantastically easy. This is a fabulous beginner project. You only ever have to work on straight lines, and you don't need a lot of complicated math or a real pattern for this. It's something that you can just kind of grab and go. What you will need is fabric and a way to sew that fabric together, be it by machine or by hand. It will be helpful to have a ruler because you're going to need to pleat down a waistband, and having measurements will really help you get that nice and even. But the fabric, how much fabric do you need? You need the length of skirt that you like, and you need 2 panels that are twice the width of your waist measurement. My waist measurement right now is about 30 inches, which means I need 2 pieces of fabric that are 60 inches wide. That does sound like a lot. That's 120 inches all told, but that's what gives these skirts a lot of their poof. So if you make it a little bit narrower, and you can fudge this, it is totally okay to fudge this. If my fabric were 54 inches wide instead of 60, I totally wouldn't worry about it. 45 inches, that's going to be too small. So you want to be as close to twice your waistband as you can, but don't worry about getting it super exactly correct because you're going to be pleating everything down and you're going to be able to make it work. You just want a lot of nice swishy fluff once we've gotten going. The other reason that I really love these skirts is that they are insanely forgiving. Because all of the construction is done in straight lines, it's very difficult to make a mistake that you can't fix. They're also very forgiving in terms of wear. You don't actually have to have a front and a back. You can make it interchangeable. And this is the best part, if you're careful about how you do it, it will flex in size at least a little bit. Most of my skirts could handle me gaining a significant amount of weight. We're talking 3, maybe even 4 dress sizes, and if I lose weight, it can handle that as well. So they're very flexible in so many ways, and I'd like to take you through a little bit of my collection so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. 18th century skirts are so easy. I have 13, soon to be 14 of them. What you're looking at here, that whole width, those are my 18th century skirts. -1, it's in the wash. I have a little bit of everything. I have my quilted petticoat over here. It's done a little bit differently from the other ones, but I've got some flannel going on. I've got some wool going on. There's light linen. There's heavy linen. I wear these all the time. They are fantastic, and they are so easy that you can whip them up and end up with a massive collection of them just like this. So I am going to grab a couple specific ones, and we're going to take a closer look. Here we have a comparison of 2 different weights of linen. I started by using some of the lighter weight linen, that's the green, but I've since switched to the heavyweight linen, and I want to show you a little bit of why. When you get up close, you can see you get a little bit more floof out of the heavier weight linen. This is the heavyweight, this is the midweight, and when you grab the midweight, it's all nice and floofy floppy. The heavier weight is a little bit stiffer, and that little bit of extra stiffness really helps to kind of punch out the shape here. This one droops a little bit more. You can see I've used different pleating styles here. I've just done standard knife pleats here. I've done a whole bunch of little box pleats here. That's also probably part of the reason why I've got a little bit more oomph coming off the hips. And this is why I've started preferring to use this heavier weight linen. It drapes a little bit better, it lasts a little bit longer, and it gives a little bit better look than the midweight. These are my 2 heaviest weight skirts. I do tend to wear them mostly in the winter, and they both have a few things that are a little bit unique to just them that we can take a look at. First things first, I like to make the visible tie out of the same fabric that I've made the skirt out of. And with fluffy fabrics, this gets to be a little bit challenging. Look how thick this tie is. It is very big, it is very thick. And this skirt is an excellent example of why you don't want to do this on both pieces. I've gone ahead and untied the front panel here. Remember, we've got these really chunky ties for the back. If I had that up front, it would look more like this one. You can see there's actually a little bulge here. That's because, and it's a little bit different on this one, but these ties on this are very big. They're very thick, and so they leave a little bit of a bulge. If you use something like a tape, which is what this is twill cotton tape, it leaves a very small knot. It's not super noticeable. The other thing I want to call your attention to here is that this is where my proper side seam is. See how much overhang you have here? And when you pull up this to tie, it kind of overlaps quite a bit. That's what makes these size adjustable. Anytime you go around here, I only really need them to just barely butt up at this line, and I've got a lot of overlap. So as my weight fluctuates, as my size fluctuates, I can keep wearing these skirts because they are almost infinitely adjustable, and that makes them super versatile and really easy to keep around. They are absolutely worth the time in that sense because you can get an awful lot of wear out of them. Now, when we come over here, this is actually probably my most favorite of all of them. This is a delightful plaid cotton flannel, but cotton flannel is sticky. It likes to grab and stick to itself. So this one is very different because I gave it a linen lining. In the process of giving it a linen lining, let me untie it here, I decided that it would be kind of cool to make it reversible. And that's why we have this big chunky tie here, because if you look on the inside, even the waistband has been done with the matching interior fabric. So I can, if I want to, flip this the other way around. When I did them, I actually whipped the panels together. You can kind of see that there. So there's not a super visible seam. And if you get up close to it, yeah, you can see where it doesn't quite match. But that does allow this to be fully reversible. So there really isn't a limit to what you can do with these. They're so flexible and so versatile and just an absolute delight to have around. I'm starting this project a little bit differently. When I already have a garment like the one I'm making, I will often use measurements from the garment that I already have. I want this skirt to be longer than what I usually make, so I found my longest skirt and I'm measuring its length. I want the one I'm making to come very close to floor level, so I tried this skirt on and decided to add 3 inches to it. I included the waistband because it's about 1 inch and can stand in for the seam allowance. I'm also measuring the ties. I'll be cutting this skirt from a 10-yard length of linen, but 10 yards is a lot to manage. While I'm on the floor, I'm measuring out the lengths I need. 44-inch long panels for the skirt and a 4-inch strip for the waistband and front ties. The 4-inch strip will be divided into 3 19-inch by 4-inch pieces. 2 of those pieces will stay as is for the waistband, and the other piece will be split in half to make 2 19-inch long, 2-inch wide pieces that will become ties. When I'm working with straight lines in linen, I almost always use the thread pulling method to make sure everything stays straight and even. I marked my fabric pieces by clipping into the selvage edge, so I'm looking for a notch that was cut into the edge of the fabric, and I'll pick a thread free. Then I start slowly pulling the thread out of the fabric. This is the most time-consuming step of the project because the threads in linen fabric really like to break. I've started keeping a light handy so when the threads do break, I can find their ends more easily and then use my picking pin to pick the end out and start over. The idea is to gently pull the thread while spreading out the bunching that pulling the thread makes. For pulling threads, the slower you can go, the better. Sudden movements are more likely to break your thread. If you go slowly, you can sometimes work the slubs, those are the thick spots in the thread, out without the thread breaking. The reason for pulling a thread out is that it makes a nice straight line to cut along. The lines can be hard to see, so I like to use my light underneath the fabric to make the line more easily visible. Once you can see the line, it's very easy to cut along it. Since you're cutting along a single thread, the cut edges will be less likely to fray as you're working on the piece. It also makes seaming and hemming easier later, especially if you're doing it by hand, because you can follow a single thread and get a perfectly straight seam line. Before we get sewing, I need to press out my waistband and ties. I didn't press the fabric before I started working on it, because I had pulled it right from the dryer and folded it to avoid wrinkles when I pre-washed, so that I wouldn't need to iron it. But it does mean that there is a little bit of crinkling near the selvage edges. I need to flatten that out first, and then I can press each piece in half. I'm jumping between the pieces after each fold and press to give the piece a chance to cool and set. The waistband only needs to be folded in half and have the allowance folded in on each end. The 2 ties need to be folded in half, and then the raw edges along the sides need to be turned in. I don't usually turn under the seam allowance at the end of the ties. I'll typically use a piece with selvage on one end, and the cut edge then goes into the waistband. Both sides are secure that way, and I don't have to do fiddly sewing unless I really want to. There are all kinds of ways for you to start building a skirt like this. My favorite is to put the waistbands on each half before sewing the skirt halves together. It's much easier that way because I only have the bulk of one skirt panel to deal with, and I can't accidentally catch up the other half as I go. Even though I only technically needed 15 inches for each waistband, I've made them 18 inches long so that the skirt will be very adjustable. I've marked that 18 inches out on one of my centering rulers, and then I find the center of the skirt panel, line it up with the 0 mark, and make the big center pleat. On an everyday skirt, I wouldn't bother with a big pleat like this. I'm making one here purely because I want this particular skirt to have more of a historical feel to it. For this style, I'll be doing a big center box pleat with knife pleats pointing to the seams on the front panel. Then on the back panel, there'll be a reverse box pleat in the center, and the knife pleats will point towards that center back. This will make the skirt look like it was pleated as one big panel that goes all the way around. For an everyday skirt, I would pleat across the whole panel, or even gather it to bring the edges down to the size of the waist. You can use any style of pleat that you would like. Your process doesn't have to be exact. It needs to look even and get down to the proper size. What kind of pleats you use and how big they are is entirely up to you. A word of caution here though. Make sure you fold under the seam allowance on the edges of the skirt panel when you do this. I blanked on that, so the selvage is visible at the pocket openings on this skirt. I don't view that as a problem worth unpicking and correcting, as 1, it isn't very noticeable, and 2, it's usually going to be hidden under a gown or a jacket flounce anyway. On a skirt for more modern wear, it would be worth correcting since it would be more obvious. Once you've got your pleats in, you can attach your waistband. If you're not the type to sew over pins, you'll want to hand baste the pleats down first. I sew over pins and generally use the pins that hold the pleats to secure the waistband for sewing. I've got the waistband and skirt with the right sides together, and I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Pressing out the waistband is the next step. You want a crisp, flat connection between the band and the skirt. The size of the skirt can make this a little bit tricky because all that extra fabric pulls where it's hanging off the ironing board, so you will need to be careful. I start by pressing the seam as it is before opening up the seam and pressing it flat. Then I press the allowance to the waistband side. You can go right to pressing the allowance into the waistband, but I find that by pressing it open first, it gives me a much neater seam. If you're the stitch in the ditch type, this is critical because it makes the ditch flat and prevents fabric ripples that might get in the way. Once the seam is pressed, I fold the waistband over and work on it from the back. I need to tuck under the seam allowance and press it. This is easy to do by eye here because the pieces were cut along a thread and therefore are completely straight. I can turn under a section and then follow the fabric threads to make sure it's even. If you stitch in the ditch, you can now do that to secure the backside of the waistband. I am not the stitch in the ditch type. I always make a mess, so unless I'm really pressed for time, I prefer to hand whip the backside of the waistband in place. It's slower, but it gives a nearly invisible finish. I also find hand sewing things like this to be extremely soothing. It's simple enough that it takes very little thought and it can become almost meditative. I've left the ends of the waistband open so that I can insert the ties. The ties on the front panel will be visible and will be made from the skirt fabric. For the ties on the back panel, you'll use cotton tape or ribbon. I tuck the cut end of the tie in about 1/2 inch. That's the allowance depth. And then I use a back stitch to secure it. If you're not hand sewing, you can run a line of top stitching along that edge to close the opening and secure the tie. A little fun bonus for you. If you stop here and put the hem on, you've made an apron. These skirts are basically 2 simple aprons sewn together. If you can make one, you can make the other. But as I'm not making an apron today, it's now time to connect the skirt panels. I've marked 10 inches down from the waistband to be the pocket opening on each side and then pinned the panels together. I used a cross pin for this as a visual reminder of where to stop. I'm also working hem to waist here because it's more important that the hem be even. The waist is 2 separate pieces, and any difference in the panel length at the waist won't be noticed. Since the panels are full widths of fabric, I can sew along the selvage line. It's close enough to my allowance size not to make a difference, and this way the different pattern of the selvage isn't seen from the outside. All that's left now is to hem the skirt. I've tried it on and I know that it is a little bit long. I estimate it needs to come up about 3 inches, but that's in bare feet and without a rump. Any hemming method will do here, and I'm extremely partial to the 18th century method where you fold down an edge, baste it in place, and then fold that edge up and whip it into place. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I've pinned up a seam allowance worth of length, and I'm using running stitch to secure it. There is another reason for using this method besides my liking it. I know that I may need to change the length of this skirt. Because of that, I want to make sure that I have the least amount of work to do for adjustments. By only going the seam allowance here, I won't have to pick this part out later. You could do this bit by machine if you wanted to as well. Since I'm securing the seam allowance, and that took 1/2 inch, I've pinned up 2.5 inches, and I'm securing that with whip stitches. This is the part that I may need to pick out and adjust later once I see how well it goes with the jacket and gown, both with and without shoes, and with and without a rump. It's tempting to do very spaced whip stitches here to make them easy to remove later, but I've learned that you want these to be fairly close stitches along the hems. If you make your stitches too far apart, it has an unpleasant tendency to catch in the heels of your shoes. Besides tripping you, it also usually rips out a fair number of stitches, which you then need to repair. I could machine the hem, but I do prefer not to see stitching on the outside of my garments. The lines are never straight enough, and if you have to pick the stitches out, it becomes a lot more obvious. But if you want to machine this hem, I would recommend using a blind hem stitch. I do love each and every one of my 18th century skirts, and I love them all for different reasons. I especially like this one because it is Moroccan blue. That is by far my favorite shade of linen right now. I could wear Moroccan blue everything, and yes, I love this skirt. It's fabulous. This skirt is a little bit different from my other Moroccan blue skirt because I have made it more in that historical style. I'm wanting this to also go with the gown that I'm planning on making. So I want something that reads a little bit more 18th century and a little bit less, I just modern gathered or pleated the waistband. I've also made this a lot longer than I would normally make my skirts because I don't know how much space a rump is going to take up, if I even want to do a rump with this. And I'm not sure yet how long I want my gown to be. So this has a lot of space. I can take the hem up if I need to. I can adjust where the hem sits if I need to. Rumps take up a bit of space. I haven't actually made the rump yet for this look. I'm not sure that the one I have is going to be big enough, so I need to make another one. If I end up needing to do that, it's a very simple change. I just need to change the front waistband so that I can bring that hem up as much as the rump lifts the back of my skirt. Not a problem. It's a very easy fix. And as I've said, these skirts are so simple to make. I made this in about a day. I think it took me 2, but it only took 4, maybe 5 hours, and that was with the hand sewing and everything. It's so easy, and it's so nice to wear a garment that is fitted to you, that hits you where you want it to hit. I don't always like super high skirts, but I don't really like really long ones that catch on everything either. So having that ability to shift things around and make it fit me is just always something that I have really, really loved about that 18th century look. You can do a lot with how you pleat the waistband. You can just gather the waistband if you'd rather. They're so flexible and they're so versatile, and they look absolutely lovely with basically anything. I wear them all the time. That's why I have as many as I do. And hopefully you have had wonderful luck putting together your own 18th century skirt, and I will see you back here next time for that rump that I need to make, because I can't start fitting the jacket or the gown until I know which rump I'm going to use. So I will see you then.